Well, good morning, Hulen Street. It is a true joy to share with you this morning. I have a question for you. Have you ever felt like a fool? So when I first moved to Europe, we moved to Paris to learn French, my wife and I, in 2015. And when we arrived there, I knew zero French. I knew nothing. And so I thought, okay, I'll join a rugby club. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That already seems a little bit foolish for someone of your waist size and muscle density. And you would not be wrong. But I joined the rugby club because here were 15 guys who knew no English. So when I was with them, it was sink or swim. I had to communicate in French. And it was fun because just a few weeks after I joined the rugby club, I had my first conversation about Christianity in French. Those guys at the rugby club, they asked me, now, what's the difference between Catholics and whatever it is you believe? Now, these days, I love getting that question. My wife and I are in Belgium, and whenever a Belgian asks me that question, I get a chance to talk about grace and the authority of Scripture and lots of great things. But back then, my answer went a little differently. I'm going to tell you exactly what I told them in French, but I'm going to tell you in English. This is what it would have sounded like to those guys. So I said, Catholics, Pope, me, Bible. Catholics, Pope, Pope, me, Bible, Bible. I felt like a fool, right? I felt like a fool. My 3-year-old is more eloquent than that, right? But I was a happy fool because I had just communicated something true about what I believed in a different language. I want to talk about foolishness this morning because actually Acts 1:8, there's something a little bit foolish about it. Every year we gather to think about Acts 1:8. Jesus says to his disciples, "You will be my witness in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth." So did you catch the foolish bit? Right? When Jesus said this, there were no cars, there were no trains, there were no planes. If you were rich, maybe you could use a horse or get on a boat if you could stomach the high risk of highway banditry or shipwreck. But for Jesus' disciples, they walked. They walked everywhere. So when they heard, you got to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, they thought, okay, well, we're right outside of Jerusalem right now, so we can walk over there and be your witnesses. That's no problem. And all of Judea and Samaria, okay, well, that's a little bit farther, but we do know how to walk over there. So yeah, we'll I guess a couple of us can walk over there. We're still not crazy about the Samaritans, but yeah, we'll be your witness in all of Judea and Samaria. And to the end of the earth. No, that is actually crazy. That is actually not going to be possible. I can't walk that far. That's a little bit foolish. And you think for them, the world was India in the east, Spain in the west, Germany in the north, Ethiopia in the south. That was the known world, right? Imagine if they knew about Australia, Madagascar, Japan, the American continents. When Jesus spoke these words, there were human beings living in all of those places, and he had just given his life for their salvation. And when he said to the ends of the earth, he meant them as well. That's a little crazy. Well, in fact, we still think that Acts 1:8 is a little bit foolish, don't we? The end of the earth. The end of the earth is hard, so far. In fact, it's a little bit foolish to be a missionary, don't you think? In fact, let's think about all the ways that it's foolish to be a missionary. First off, it's a terrible financial decision. Taxes and Social Security in a foreign country is a nightmare. Sometimes you get taxed twice, here in this government and the other government. That's just unfair. Can't really buy assets or land because you never know when you're going to lose your visa, get kicked out of the country, and lose everything. So if you want to build wealth, stay in your home country. That's the way to go. Like I said, learning another language is hard. And even after years and years of learning another language, you still can't communicate like a native speaker. It's a little foolish, and it's a little arrogant of me, don't you think? I moved to Europe And I told everyone I'm here to plant a French-speaking church, and I didn't know how to speak any French. Yeah. Wasn't I being a little bit foolish and a little bit arrogant, honestly? Add to the language the fact that 99% of the people that I meet in Belgium do not want me to plant a church in Belgium. They're not just apathetic to the fact, they're hostile to the fact. They say to me, "Don't you know we don't want a church here?" I say, I do know. I'm just trying to get you to reconsider, you know? Finally, there are a lot of crazy places in this world, a lot of dangerous places. On November 15th, 2015, 1 month to the day before Holly and I got on a plane and moved to Paris, one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in recent history killed 130 Parisians through a coordinated attack of bombings and mass shootings throughout Paris, including a soccer stadium. Holly and I started receiving texts and calls. "Are you still going?" What were they really asking us? Are you still foolish enough to go? We arrived in Paris with the goal of learning French for a year and then moving to Belgium. And on March 22nd, 2016, 3 months after we had arrived in Paris, coordinated bombings in the Brussels airport in Belgium and at the central Brussels train station killed 34 people and wounded another 200. So 2 bombings at the airport that we just flew out of 3 months ago to arrive here in Texas, and another bombing at the train station that I used 3 times a week when I was finishing my French language study in Belgium. You can say, even then with that danger, what were the chances that you'd end up in one of those places? Well, I personally know missionaries who were in the soccer stadium that day when the bombs went off, and my teammate, my close friend, was at the airport that day picking someone off when the bombs went off in Belgium. You know, it continued. On July 14th, 2016, a man got in a truck and mowed down 86 people in Nice, France. And on July 26, 2016, 2 ISIS operatives stormed a church in Normandy, France, and killed a priest during the service that morning. That was a purposeful attack on the expression of the Christian faith, and it happened 1 hour from where I was living at that very moment. So within 8 months of us arriving in France, there were 4 violent and fatal terrorist attacks in the part of the world that we were called to. Were we wise to remain? Or were we being foolish? Now, it should come as a comfort to you that I come by my foolishness honestly. Many of you know my father, Dean Sieberhagen. He's right here. He's an elder here at Hulen Street. He has a reputation for having a calm head, for having a lot of wisdom. I'm here to tell you it's all a sham. That man is a fool. When I was young, he moved our whole family to the former Soviet Union. Near, by the way, to where the Soviets used to test their nuclear bombs. That's why all the Sieberhagens, we have a faint glow to us, you know? You think it's the holiness or something. It's the radioactivity, you know? When we got there, we didn't know the language or the culture. My brothers and I, we had to be homeschooled. We had no friends. We lost electricity for weeks at a time. The cutting-edge technology of refrigerated meat had only barely come to the region. And we bought most of our meat at an open-air meat market, you know? And let me tell you, that didn't sit well with our stomachs. One winter, our pipes froze. We lost heat for the whole winter. I woke up one morning, and the water in the toilet bowl had frozen solid. At one point, we nearly all died from carbon monoxide poisoning because of faulty pipes in the house where we lived. So you could argue my dad was being a fool for moving his family to live in those conditions. And in fact, many people did argue that, including his father-in-law. Well, what can I say? We're a family of fools. And it all centers around this verse in 1 Corinthians 1:25. Paul writes, "For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." I think sometimes we can get behind the weakness thing a little bit easier, you know? We like to say, "I am weak, but he is strong." We like to seem holy, you know? Admitting that you're weaker than God is pretty easy to do. But I think that the foolishness part of this is another matter. See, we don't like to be foolish. We like to have respect, and we like to seem smart. And if I can be honest with you, an idol in my life that I've been fighting all my life is the desire to be cool, right? I want to be cool. I want to be liked by my peers. I want everybody to think I'm cool. And look how skinny these pants are. Do you think I'm wearing these for the comfort? I want to be cool, you know? But if you're a fool, you can't be cool anymore. And I think that one day in heaven, right, the first will be last, and the fools will be cool, and the cool will be fools. And what I mean is, right, those of us who spend our lives pursuing coolness or clout will realize our folly in that day. The point is this, right? The wisdom of God is not like the wisdom of men and women. In fact, the wisdom of God often seems like foolishness to conventional wisdom. And this is what Paul says, right? The foolishness of God is wiser than men and women. And this idea reaches its climax at the cross of Christ. This is what this passage in 1 Corinthians is all about. Let's read it a little bit, starting in verse 18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? This is the idea that God's rescue plan for all of humanity, the way he would save us and bring us back into relationship with him, the way he was going to do that was completely unimaginable to the people living in Jesus' day in the Roman Empire, right? It was foolish to those who first heard about it. That God would save humanity from sin and death through a cross, this is folly. And this is part of why we can know that Christianity is true, by the way. Because no human mind would ever think up this plan to save humanity, especially not in Jesus' day. This is why, right, Paul is almost taunting them, right? Where's the one who's wise, you know? Where's the scribe? Where's the debater of the sage? Hey, all of you people who think you're so smart, could you possibly have thought this up? God has made you look foolish because the way he has saved up, you could never have thunk up on your own, right? Think about their culture. Theologically, it was unimaginable that the Messiah could be killed. Philosophically, it was unimaginable that the divine nature could hang in flesh on the cross. Politically, it was unimaginable that the promised king would be crucified by the very empire that he was supposed to overthrow. Culturally, it was unimaginable that one shamed by the crucifixion could ever be worshipped as God. It was simply unimaginable. The same way that you and I can't imagine a color that we've never seen before, the people living in Jesus' day could not imagine reconciliation with God happening through a Roman cross. Now, the image of the cross is ubiquitous in our lives now, right? We got earrings, we got tattoos, we got bumper stickers, you name it, we'll paint a cross on it, right? It's lost a little bit of the shock value. In Jesus' day, the cross, the image of the cross was a coarse and vulgar thing. It was not discussed in polite company. It was painful to look at. In fact, the early church didn't start using the image of the cross in worship and on their tombs until the 5th or the 6th century, 500 years after Jesus at least. Why? It was too painful for them to look at. So because of this, one of the very first images we have of Jesus on the cross comes from the 2nd century, from a very unlikely place, from a Roman boarding school in Rome on Palatine Hill. They think it was an imperial school for Roman page boys. And in that school, on a wall, they discovered a piece of graffiti etched into the wall, and it's called the Alexamenos graffito, and here it is. So on the left is a photo of the graffiti, and on the right is an etching, so we can kind of see clearly what's going on. Now, in the image, you can see Jesus hanging on the cross, but he's got the head of a donkey. Now then, as well as now, there was no greater image of a fool than a donkey. On the left side of the image is Alexamenos, and the caption reads, "Alexamenos worships his God." So with that, the story becomes clear. Alexamenos was a Roman schoolboy who became a Christian, and his classmates mocked him with this etching on the wall. They mocked Jesus, right, with the head of a donkey. They also mocked Alexamenos for worshiping. Who's a greater fool, in fact, the donkey or the one who worships a donkey as God? These Roman schoolboys could not get past the folly of the cross. With this image, one of the very first images we have of Jesus on the cross is this, and we can see just how much of a barrier it was to their understanding of the gospel. A cross? Really, a cross? Paul goes a little bit further and explains a little bit what's going on in 1 Corinthians. So carrying on in verse 21, Paul writes, "For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." I love these verses. These are amazing verses. Right? Christ crucified is a stumbling block to the Jews. Remember the verse in Deuteronomy 21, right? Anyone who hangs on a tree is cursed. For Jews, they could not imagine, right? This was too difficult for them to think about. Messiah on a tree, on a cross. And the cross was folly to the Gentiles. And we saw this with the Alexamenos graffito, right? This is what they thought. This is just silliness, foolishness, stupidity, idiocy. We can't imagine it. And yet, Paul says, Christ on the cross is the power of God and the wisdom of God. My favorite thing about the Alexamenos graffito is that around the corner from the etching, we found another etching in the wall. Two little words in a different hand, maybe Alexamenos' own hand. And it says, Alexamenos fidelis. What does it mean? Alexamenos is faithful. Alexamenos didn't submit to the mockery of his classmates. He stood firm in the power and the wisdom of God. He saw the cross in light of the resurrection. The resurrection confirms that the cross is the power of God and the wisdom of God, and Alexamenos stood firm on that truth. And we can see a smile on God's face through all of this, right? Paul writes, "It pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe." This means God chose the cross intentionally. He chose what was foolish in the world's eyes so that his power and his glory might be displayed for all to see. Alexamenos is faithful. Man, I pray for the courage and the faithfulness of Alexamenos in my own life. He followed Jesus despite the cost. And I'm really privileged to be able to preach this sermon after the series that we just came out of. Wes kind of led us through these last 3 weeks, the call to follow Jesus and what that looks like. And he walked us through those conversations in Luke 9. What's interesting about those conversations, right, is in each one, Jesus confronts earthly, conventional wisdom with heavenly wisdom. And it seemed foolish at first glance to those people, right? Remember the conversations. The Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So does that mean We just don't buy a house, never have a home, let the dead bury their own dead. Well, okay, but they're not going to do that. So we're just going to have corpses everywhere? That doesn't make any sense, right? Or no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of heaven. So I can't even hug my family goodbye? At first glance seems foolish. But Jesus had a subversive wisdom to share, and Wes so brilliantly shared with us what each of those teachings meant. But there was one more teaching from Jesus about following him. And the scholar N.T. Wright calls it the summit of Jesus' subversive teaching. It would have been more difficult than any of those teachings in Luke 9. And it was found in Matthew, in Mark, and in Luke. Here it is in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Why would this have been so difficult? For us, in our me culture, it's the deny yourself part, right? Oh, deny ourselves, that's so hard. But for the disciples, it's the mention of the cross. Take up my cross? Excuse me, take up my cross? Did you really just say cross? Jesus is intentionally combining these two things, right? The foolishness of the cross with denying yourself, right? That fully denying yourself and following Jesus does lead to foolishness in the world's eyes. It means that as you daily seek to take up your cross, right, and live sacrificially in obedience to Jesus, out of a deep love for your friends, your family, your neighbor, even your enemies, right? As you embrace Christian sanctification, as you become more and more like Jesus, you will do increasingly foolish things in the world's eyes. There's no avoiding it. The more you are attuned to the wisdom of God, the more the conventional wisdom of the world will consider you to be foolish. And it's not because you wear a jester's cap and you're juggling in the street, right? It's because you cling ever more tightly to the folly of the cross as your only salvation and hope. So, 4 years ago, Holly and I were sitting here in this tent, and after our first 3 years in Europe, and we felt like fools. We did. We felt like fools. We had learned the language, we had learned a little bit of culture, and we had also learned every which way how not to plant a church in Belgium. Everything we did didn't work. And so we were back here in the States for a few months, and we were thinking, are we just being foolish? Are we just trying to do something impossible, something that is just not logical, something that is just not going to work? Are we just fools? I started to think about these verses, and I started to think about these questions I had, like why? Why the folly of the cross? Why did God choose the foolishness of the cross? And why did God choose me to do something foolish? Paul tells us in verse 29, right? Why? So that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. So Paul mentions, right, the vast riches and blessing that the true wisdom of God bestows on us out of his grace and mercy, right? Look what the folly of the cross bestows on us. Righteousness, sanctification, redemption. Incredible. But why? So that no human being can boast before God. You can't do it. We can't do it. Only God could have saved humanity. Only God could have thought up the cross as the means for salvation for all of humanity. And so when we say, thank you, God, for saving me, it's truly all glory and honor are going to him because only he could have done that. Paul says, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. So I'm going to do a bit of boasting now. This is what the Lord did in the last 4 years in Belgium, right? We went back, and there were a couple of Belgian believers, 2 or 3, who were just foolish enough to do something crazy with us. Start meeting together as a church in the downtown of where we lived, in our living room, a downtown that hadn't seen a church in over 25 years. Right as we started the church, the pandemic hit, and there we were again thinking, how, Lord? How is this going to lead to the establishment of your church here in Belgium? We can't see it. We don't know how. But the Lord knew. Right as the restrictions started lifting, the Lord gave our team a vision for starting an arts center downtown. Now, this is a little bit of a crazy thing to do. You guys might think that an arts center is no big deal. You just start an arts center. But for Belgians, specifically Belgian Christians, this was an idea that was way outside of the box for them. You know, they had an idea of how ministry was supposed to go, and this was not it. And add to this that rent in our city in Europe is expensive. We didn't know how this was going to happen, but we started praying foolish prayers. God, give us a space. God, do something here in this city. We would share with Belgians our plan, and they would give us that look like, oh, these crazy Americans trying to do something foolish. We didn't, at that point, we agreed with them. We don't know how this is going to happen. We just know that God has put this burden in our hearts to see this as a reality in our city. And God acted. One of our teammates met a Belgian believer who was a businessman. When we told him about our vision, he said, this is it. I've been praying for years that God would show me how to invest in my own country and how to support a local church in my country. And what you're doing, I know, is what I'm called to support. So find a space, sign a lease. I'm going to cover rent for as long as you need it. That was not us. That was the Lord divinely acting to say, yes, this is the direction I want you to go. So a year ago, our arts center opened. 6 days a week, we have open mic nights. We have art exhibits where we ask local artists to come in and share their work. We have choir rehearsals, English clubs. We try to make the space as hospitable and welcoming as possible. And because of this art center, our ability to share the gospel with Belgians has multiplied tenfold. And on the seventh day, it's a church. And 20 Belgian believers gather together to worship the King of Kings in the downtown of a city that just a few years ago, there was no place for them to worship. Last week, my teammate bought an inflatable jacuzzi. Oh, what a glorious day in the life of a missionary when they must go and buy an inflatable jacuzzi. Why? At the end of this month, we're going to have a baptism. Right? Something so beautiful that we could not have imagined. How is this going to happen? Seems foolishness to imagine a world where Belgians are getting baptized here in this place where everybody says it's not going to happen. But God acted. But God's power and wisdom acted when conventional wisdom said, this is just foolishness. I hope you can see my heart in this. I don't like telling long sermon illustrations where I'm the hero of this story. I'm not the hero of this story. God is the hero. Only He can bring dead people to life. And He's doing it in places that conventional wisdom says, no, it's not going to happen there. Because the foolishness of God is greater and better than the wisdom of men. So I have a question for you. What foolishness is God calling you to? What foolishness is God calling you to? Well, the first one's non-negotiable, right? Take up your cross and follow Jesus. Denying ourselves and following Jesus is the first step. Yeah, it still looks foolish to the world 2,000 years later. But this step it's about denying ourselves, submitting to God, and seeing, knowing, believing that the foolishness of God is greater, better, more wise, more fulfilling, and more joyful than any plan for your life that you could possibly think up using your own wisdom. If you've never denied yourself, taken up your cross and follow Jesus, this morning is the morning to do it. It's the first step in the foolishness that God is calling you to. But maybe God's calling you to an even deeper foolishness to give. To give. And the world's conventional wisdom has a lot to say about how we use our money, right? The fact is, Jesus also had a lot to say about how we use our money. And his vision doesn't really align with the conventional wisdom of the world. In fact, I would argue that if you showed your financials and your financial plan to a financial planner who's not a Christian, who doesn't really understand the kingdom of heaven, if you show your financials to that guy and he says, "This looks great to me, you're doing nothing wrong, this is 100% what I would do," I would argue that you're not being foolish enough with your money. As Christians, the way we use our money should be concerning to secular financial planners. They should be saying to us, "I think you're being too generous. I think you should save some of this. I don't understand why you're giving so much." So every Christmas, Hulen Street takes up a missions offering, and we're going to start giving in a few weeks now. That missions offering directly supports Holly and I to be overseas in Belgium and do what we do. It also supports hundreds of other missionaries like us. The missions offering goes towards a big missions offering called the Lottie Moon Missions Offering, and this is how we as Hulen Street work with other churches to support church planning to the ends of the earth. It supports the mission organization I work for, the International Mission Board. And last year, the International Mission Board saw over 100,000 baptisms and 22,000 new churches last year alone. Now, what I love about the International Mission Board is that we only send missionaries to foolish places. We only send them to hard places. In fact, the reality is there are no easy places left. If it's easy to plant a church there's already a church there. So if you want to go as a missionary, you're going to go somewhere foolish. So, think about those numbers again. 22,000 new churches in places in the world where all conventional wisdom says there's no way a new church is going to be there. Guys, this is the power and the wisdom of God. He can do things that us, in our wisdom, we have no way of imagining. How is this going to happen? Why are we going to those places? Those are the very places where the people who've never heard about the wisdom and power of God live. They don't know about the power of God to save. And this is why we're there. This is why we go. So I want you to pray. Pray about how you're going to give to the missions offering this December. Pray about how foolish does God want you to be with your money. But of course, there's one last way that God might be calling you to be a fool this morning. That's to go. Go to the end of the earth. Hulen Street is sending out 2 short-term mission trips next year, one to Madagascar and one to South Africa. Guys, is it wise to travel right now with COVID still lingering, with the airlines in chaos, with inflation still on the rise? Maybe God's calling you to be foolish enough to go to the tip of Africa next year with Hulen Street. And maybe God's calling you to deeper foolishness than that. Maybe God's calling you to long-term missions, to move, to get on a plane not knowing when you'll come back. You say, but, my mortgage is here, my job is here, my friends and family are here. I'm not trained, I'm not qualified, I don't think I could learn another language. Yeah. Conventional wisdom is always going to have lots of reasons for you not to go. But remember the verse that we started out with this morning. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. The power of the cross has not diminished one single bit in the last 2,000 years. It still is the way to salvation for the nations on the end of this earth. I'm asking you, are you foolish enough to go? Because of this, Paul was willing to be a fool. He writes just a few chapters later, we are fools for Christ. Because of this, my dad was willing to be a fool and moved to the former Soviet Union all those years ago. And because of this, I'm still willing to be a fool and live an ocean away from my friends and family. What foolishness is God calling you to this morning? I'm going to hand it back over to Wes to close us this morning. Thank you.
So many great things there, and hope you heard that all. And it's interesting to me, for those of you who've been around the last couple of weeks, and we've had our big family meeting, we're having our smaller kind of town hall meetings on Wednesdays at 6:30. You know what's funny is that we're considering some things for our church's future that are unconventional. And I love what Thomas said, that we as a church are beginning to pray some foolish prayers. Just consider some things that God may be calling us as a church to do differently. And love the spirit of that. And we see that reflected, of course, in God's word and what Tom and Holly are living out in their lives, and so many others doing that. And we're just kind of following right along with them in that, in the spirit of that. But I would ask you just to consider the things he asked you, you know, those different things. What is God calling you to do that may be foolish? Maybe it's finally and just getting clarity on your relationship with him, taking that step of understanding what it means to follow him. What does that look like to be a Christian? If you want to know more about that, let's have that conversation. It deserves a conversation. It comes with questions. You don't have to have it completely all solved or figured out, but we want to have those conversations. We want to help you answer some of those questions. And some of you want to be foolish. You know, he mentioned with our money, and we are going to be, after the Thanksgiving holiday, we're going to begin taking an offering every single week. It'll be going directly to not just Tom and Holly, but thousands of missionaries around the world. And it might be, you know, this is a time where we typically are foolish with our money, but not in the right way. As we get into the holiday season, some of you in the past have been foolish with your money through the holidays, but not in the right way. You're still paying 24% interest on a Tickle Me Elmo. Hey, listen, we could do better. We could make a better investment than some of those things we put on credit, right? There's just so many great things, just even to consider the foolishness. Maybe God is going to spark something in your heart right now, in your mind you've never thought of before. Maybe you could be that person that goes somewhere. Maybe God's calling to transfer you. You have a certain unique gifting and skill set. You do something in your work and in your career. Let me tell you something. There are opportunities for God to leverage those things all over the world. All you have to do is just to be willing to ask the question, like, God, are you calling me? Is that something you might want to do in my life and in my family's life for your good and your glory and your kingdom? Those are great questions. Those are dangerous questions. Those are scary questions. But they're questions we all need to ask, and I hope that you ask them and you consider them, okay? So we close our service with these words that we speak over to you every single week. Let's do it again. So until we meet again, seek the Lord through his word. Pray to the Lord by his spirit. Tell of the Lord with your words and glorify the Lord in your work. Until we meet again, live your life this week for the same reason that Jesus gave his. All together. For the life of the world. We love you guys. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you next week.